This episode may contain content not suitable for some audiences. Listener discretion is advised. The Murder of Billie-Jo Jenkins. Back in 1997, a 13-year-old girl was brutally murdered in Essex in the middle of the day. The person responsible was soon arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Case closed. Or so everybody thought. Billie-Jo was born on the 29th of March 1983 in East London to Bill Jenkins and Deborah Barnett. The two had met in a kind of curious double date of sorts while Bill was incarcerated for various assaults in Wandsworth Prison. After his release, Bill moved in with Debbie, and 6 weeks after Billie-Jo's birth, they married. However, as Bill could not keep himself out of prison, and Debbie had her own alcohol problems and struggled to care for the house and her children, the family eventually fell apart. By the time Billie-Jo was 9 years old, she and her half-brother were placed in foster care with Sean and Lois Jenkins, who were no relation to Billie-Jo. The Jenkins lived in Bow, East England, with their 4 daughters, one of whom was friends with Billie-Jo from school. Lois worked as a social worker, and her husband as a deputy headmaster. Due to Sean's work, just a week after Billie-Jo had arrived, the family moved to the historic town of Hastings in East Essex. At first, the Jenkins were unsure how Billie-Jo would adapt to the change, as her school, friends and biological family were in London, especially as her brother was also taken back to a children's home. But it seemed that they worried for nothing. On the contrary, Billie-Jo was happy being part of her new family and excited about her new life in Essex. She saw the move as a fresh start. Indeed, in Hastings, Billie-Jo began to thrive. She enjoyed the seaside, started doing well at school, and seemed stable and happy. Billie-Jo would often tell her friends about her dreams of becoming an actor, and many believed she was destined to be a star. But unfortunately, we will never know what Billie-Jo Jenkins could have achieved in her life, as it was cut short just a few years later. On the afternoon of Saturday, the 15th of February, 1997, a 999 operator answered a frantic call. "My daughter's fallen," or "She's got head injuries. There's blood everywhere. She's on the floor." The caller was Sean Jenkins, and the daughter in question, 13-year-old Billie-Jo. By the time the paramedics arrived in the back garden of the family home, there was nothing they could have done. Billie-Jo was pronounced dead at the scene. According to Sean, he had remained at home with Annie and Billie-Jo that morning, while Lois had taken Esther and Maya for a walk and Lottie was at a clarinet lesson. Billie-Jo had been painting the French windows at the back of the house. Around 3 p.m, Sean said he went to pick up Lottie, taking Annie with him. Billie-Jo was left alone. When the 3 returned, Sean decided to make a trip to the local DIY store. Apparently, he had been in the house with Billie-Jo for no more than 3 minutes, while Annie and Lottie waited in the car. But when they returned 20 minutes later, Lottie discovered Billie-Jo's battered body in a pool of blood on the patio. The autopsy that was performed on the 16th of February revealed Billie-Jo had died from 9 blows to her head by an iron tent peg. She also had bruising and abrasions to her forearms and the back of one hand, telling that she had tried to defend herself. In addition, Billie-Jo had a broken nose with a piece of plastic stuffed inside it and bruising to her left eye. Her brain had been badly lacerated during the attack, and pieces of her skull and brain matter were found in her hair. Due to the manner of the injuries, it is believed Billie-Jo first stood face to face with her attacker, who had then continued hitting her after she fell to the ground. No fingerprints were found on the weapon. The police initially investigated a mysterious man that had reportedly been seen acting strangely in Alexandra Park near Billie-Jo's home as a suspect. The man would eventually be identified as a 44-year-old known as just Mr. B. He was arrested and informally questioned, and his clothes were tested for Billie-Jo's DNA, but came back negative. As a result, Mr. B was cleared as a suspect and released into psychiatric care. Soon after, the police began to doubt if Sean Jenkins had been telling them the whole truth. His explanation about going to the DIY store to get white spirit didn't make much sense to the detectives, as they found out he had a bottle already in the house. In addition, Sean had been acting somewhat erratic and circled a nearby park twice, according to his daughters, before returning home. Also, how did over 100 microscopic droplets of Billie-Jo's blood end up on his clothes? Finally, on the 24th of February 1997, 9 days after Billie-Jo's death, Sean was arrested and charged with the murder of his foster daughter 3 weeks later. During the trial, Sean's defense tried their best to argue that he had no reason to kill Billie-Jo, and the blood found on his trousers and shirt could have been expelled onto him when he knelt next to her body, but their efforts were in vain. The jury found Sean Jenkins guilty of murder on the 2nd of July 1998, and he was sentenced to life in prison. However, that was not the end of the story. After one failed appeal, Sean's case was referred back to the Court of Appeal in August 2004, and this time the outcome was very different. At the retrial, forensic scientists stated that the microscopic blood found on Sean's clothes could have been caused by air being released from Billie-Jo's airways as he moved her. The first trial failed to end in a verdict, and at a second retrial, the jury were unable to reach a decision. As a result, the judge announced he had seen enough, and Sean Jenkins was formally acquitted. After his release, the force stated that they had no plans to reopen Billie-Jo Jenkins' murder investigation, but they are still doing a forensic review of the case. Meanwhile, we are still left with the question: who really murdered Billie-Jo? Or was her murderer simply allowed to walk free?